Imagined that celebrating a decade of marriage would turn into the most soul-crushing night of my entire existence. There I sat, wedged into a chair at an absurdly long table in the heart of Manhattan, surrounded by crystal glasses that caught the light from chandeliers overhead and the pretentious laughter of people who measured success by the logos on their key fobs. My name is Linda Reed, and for the better part of 8 years, I've worked as a building superintendent across various properties in New York City. I know exactly what crosses your mind when you hear that. Janitor. Custodian. The woman who mops up after everyone else. Every single morning before dawn breaks, I pull on my Navy work uniform, lace up boots that have seen better days, and head into the gleaming towers of glass and steel that scrape against the sky. My job involves sweeping marble lobbies until they shine like mirrors, polishing chrome handrails until you can see your reflection perfectly, scrubbing away the scuff marks left by expensive shoes worn by men in tailored suits who never once glance in my direction as they rush past. To most people walking through those buildings, I'm completely invisible, just part of the background, like the elevator music or the potted plants strategically placed in corners. But to me, this work has always meant dignity. That's why I didn't understand when my husband, Ethan, started looking at me like I was something he needed to hide. That night, our 10th anniversary, he insisted we celebrate at a ridiculously overpriced restaurant with his college friends and their successful husbands, the kind of place where the bread basket feels like a luxury and the wine labels might as well be written in code. I spent nearly an hour ironing my best dress shirt, borrowing a blazer from a coworker, trying to make myself presentable in a world that was never built for women like me. And then, in front of everyone, under those chandeliers, over those crystal glasses, my husband stood up with a wine glass in his hand, smiled like he was about to toast, and announced he wanted a divorce. Not privately, not later, not gently. Right there, like I was a problem he was finally proud to discard. I walked out without saying a word, my face burning, my hands shaking, my entire life splitting in two, on a Manhattan sidewalk, under October air that felt sharper than any insult. And then, as I leaned against a brick wall, trying to remember how to breathe, a black town car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down. An older man in a charcoal suit leaned forward and said calmly, "Linda Reed?" That was the moment I realized this night wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of something I never saw coming. Before that night, before the chandeliers and the humiliation and the silence that swallowed me whole, I truly believed I understood my life. I was 32 when I met Ethan during our sophomore year of college. I was practical, grounded, the kind of woman who always had a part-time job, even when she didn't strictly need one. I worked evenings at the campus facilities office, cleaning lecture halls after classes ended, emptying trash cans, wiping down desks still warm from students who never thought twice about who cleaned up after them. Ethan noticed me because I was different. At least that's what he told me back then. He came from a comfortable background, not extravagant, but secure. The kind of family where money wasn't discussed because there was always enough. No panic over rent, no choosing between groceries and utilities. When he talked about his childhood, it was filled with vacations, summer camps, and parents who never missed a school event. When I told him about my grandfather, Samuel Reed, and how he raised me after my mother passed, Ethan listened like it was a story out of a book. My grandfather used to sit me down on the porch and say, "A woman's worth isn't measured by what she owns or who she knows. It's measured by whether she can stand upright when everything around her is trying to push her down." Those words became my spine. Ethan said he admired that about me, said he was tired of entitled girls who had never worked a real day in their lives. He loved my independence, my refusal to ask for help, my pride in honest labor. I believed him. We married right after graduation. Small ceremony, nothing fancy, a modest apartment in Queens with creaky floors and neighbors who argued too loudly. I worked full-time as a building superintendent, and Ethan started climbing the ladder in marketing. For a while, it felt like we were a team. Two people building something real from the ground up. But everything changed when we moved to Manhattan for his job. Suddenly, my blue-collar income wasn't charming anymore. It was inconvenient, embarrassing. He started coming home from dinners and brunches with friends whose lives looked nothing like ours. Husbands who worked in investment banking. Tech founders who talked about exits and stock options. Men who treated luxury like oxygen. Ethan never outright said I wasn't enough at first. It came in sighs when I walked through the door smelling like disinfectant. in jokes about real careers, in comments about how his friends' wives didn't have to work weekends or scrub floors. I noticed everything. The way he compared me to other women without saying my name. The way his family smiled politely but never asked about my job. The way conversations shifted when I entered the room. But I told myself this was what marriage was: endurance. That love meant patience. That if I just worked harder, saved more, proved myself again and again, he'd remember why he married me. I picked up extra shifts, covered bills without complaint, let him buy things we couldn't really afford because I didn't want to be the reason he felt behind. And somehow, without realizing it, I became smaller inside my own life. By the time our 10th anniversary arrived, I didn't hear alarm bells. I heard hope. I thought that dinner was a chance for him to finally see me again, to remember the woman who believed in dignity more than appearances. I had no idea he'd already decided I was something he needed to escape. And I definitely had no idea that my past, something I thought I'd walked away from forever, was quietly watching me, waiting for the exact moment my life fell apart. Looking back now, the warning signs were everywhere. They just didn't scream, they whispered. Ethan stopped asking about my days. When I came home exhausted, shoulders aching, hands rough from chemicals and hard surfaces, he'd nod absently, already halfway back into his phone. If I tried to talk about a tenant who was sick or an elderly woman I'd helped carry groceries up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken, his eyes would glaze over. "Linda, that's nice," he'd say, like he was indulging a child. His friends became his mirror. Every weekend seemed to involve another brunch, another dinner, another gathering where success was measured in car models and vacation photos. I was invited less and less. When I did go, I felt like furniture, present but unnecessary. Once, at a rooftop party, one of his friends joked, "So what do you actually do all day?" Ethan laughed before I could answer. "She keeps the lights on," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Literally." Everyone laughed. I smiled. But something cracked quietly inside me. His family didn't help. His mother, always impeccably dressed, had a way of asking questions that weren't really questions at all. "Have you thought about doing something more flexible?" she asked once, sipping her wine. "Something that fits better with Ethan's trajectory?" I nodded politely, even though my job was the most stable thing in our entire household. The comments grew sharper as time passed. When I suggested saving for something practical, Ethan would sigh. "We can't live like we're scared forever," he'd say. When I worked late, he'd accuse me of lacking ambition. "When are you going to want more?" he asked one night, frustration flashing in his eyes. I wanted to scream that I already wanted more. More respect, more partnership, more kindness. But I swallowed it down like I always did. And then there were the comparisons. Lindsay's husband just bought her a Tesla. Jason and his wife are spending the summer in Europe. Connor closed a deal so big he's thinking of retiring early. Each sentence landed like a quiet verdict. "You are behind. You are not enough. You are embarrassing me." I started doubting myself in ways I never had before. I'd catch my reflection in polished elevator doors and wonder if I looked small, if my calloused hands gave me away before I ever spoke, if loving honest work had somehow made me less worthy of love. But the most painful part wasn't his words. It was his silence. The way he never defended me, never corrected anyone, never reminded them who I was when no one was watching. By the time he suggested we celebrate our anniversary with his friends, "It'll be good for us," he said, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Something about it felt wrong. Still, I agreed, because I was still trying to prove I belonged in a life that had already decided I didn't. I told myself that 10 years meant something, that marriage couldn't be reduced to paychecks and appearances, that the man who once admired my strength would eventually remember it. I didn't realize that Ethan wasn't forgetting who I was. He was actively rewriting the story, one where I was the inconvenience standing between him and the life he thought he deserved. And the dinner he insisted on? That wasn't a celebration. It was a stage. The restaurant was exactly what I feared it would be. Too bright, too polished, too expensive in a way that felt intentional, like the price tag itself was meant to separate people into categories. We were seated at a long table in the center of the room, white tablecloth stretched tight, crystal glasses aligned with military precision. Everywhere I looked, there were designer dresses, tailored suits, watches that probably cost more than my car. I sat beside Ethan, my posture straight, hands folded in my lap, already bracing myself. Wine flowed freely, bottles with names I couldn't pronounce. The appetizers arrived in tiny portions arranged like artwork. Conversation bounced effortlessly between vacations, investments, new cars, promotions, Barcelona, Santorini, a summer house in the Hamptons. I stayed quiet, smiling when appropriate, focusing on the breadbasket like it was an anchor. For a few minutes, I thought maybe I'd survive the night. Then Lindsay started talking about her husband surprising her with a Tesla, one with those dramatic doors that opened like wings. Everyone leaned in, impressed. And that's when Ethan turned toward me. "Well," he said lightly, swirling his wine, "while all your husbands are closing deals and driving luxury cars, my wife spends her days scrubbing toilets and mopping floors in Midtown." He said it casually, almost joking, but loud enough. The table went still in that way people do when they sense something uncomfortable but don't know how to respond. A few polite laughs fluttered and died quickly. My face burned. I stared at my plate, the room suddenly too hot, my heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. I told myself it was the wine talking, that he didn't mean it like that, but he didn't stop. When I mentioned helping an elderly tenant carry groceries up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken, trying desperately to contribute something human to the conversation, Ethan rolled his eyes. "Seriously, Linda," he said, "groceries? These people are negotiating million-dollar contracts, and you're bragging about carrying bags." This time the laughter was sharper, more deliberate. I felt something tighten in my chest, like my lungs were refusing to expand fully. I wanted to disappear into the chair, into the floor, into anything that wasn't this moment. I tried to change the subject. Every time I opened my mouth, Ethan found a way to cut me off, dismiss me, turn me into a punchline. And then, just as the dessert plates were cleared, Ethan stood up. He picked up his wine glass and smiled, the kind of smile he used at networking events, polished and practiced. For a split second, I thought maybe he was going to toast our anniversary. 10 years. Something kind. Something safe. "I'd like to make a toast," he said. The restaurant quieted. Nearby tables turned to look. "I've spent a long time pretending everything is fine," he continued, "but tonight feels like the right moment to finally be honest with everyone and with myself." My stomach dropped. "I want a divorce." The words hit the room like shattered glass. Silence fell, heavy, absolute. "I'm done being married to someone who cleans buildings while my friends' husbands are building empires," he went on, his voice steady, calculated. "I deserve a partner who can provide the lifestyle I've always wanted, someone who belongs in my social circle, someone who doesn't embarrass me at events like this." He looked directly at me. I couldn't breathe. My ears rang, my vision tunneled. Every cell in my body felt exposed, like I'd been stripped bare in front of strangers. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor felt deafening. I grabbed my borrowed blazer, my hands shaking, and walked toward the exit without saying a single word. Behind me, Ethan's voice rose, probably explaining himself, justifying what he'd done. I didn't listen. The cold October air outside slapped my face, sharp and real, and I welcomed it. I walked without direction, my thoughts tangled, my chest tight, my hands trembling. 10 years, reduced to a performance. I leaned against a brick wall outside a bodega, trying to remember how to breathe. That's when a black town car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down. An older man in a charcoal suit leaned forward. "Linda Reed?" My body went rigid. "Yes," I said cautiously. "My name is Thomas. I work for your father." The name I hadn't spoken in nearly 9 years landed like a shock to my system. And in that moment, standing alone on a Manhattan sidewalk, I realized the night wasn't finished with me yet. Not even close. I didn't respond right away. When Thomas said the word father, my mind rejected it before my body could catch up. My throat tightened, and for a moment I genuinely thought I might be sick. That name, James Reed, belonged to a life I had sealed off, locked away, and refused to revisit for nearly a decade. "My father?" I repeated, my voice thin, unfamiliar even to my own ears. "Why now?" Thomas didn't rush me. He studied my face with an expression that wasn't curiosity, but something closer to understanding. "He asked me to give you this," he said, carefully extending a large manila envelope sealed with dark red wax. I recognized the seal instantly. A lion's head in profile, my father's company emblem, the same one he used on contracts, and birthday cards, back when I was still his daughter. My hands shook as I took the envelope. "Why tonight?" I asked, suspicion cutting through the shock. "It's been 9 years. He doesn't get to just—" "Please," Thomas said gently, "just read it." The car pulled away before I could say anything else, leaving me alone under a flickering streetlight, my entire body buzzing with adrenaline and disbelief. I broke the seal with trembling fingers. The letter was handwritten, heavy paper, dark blue ink. My father's sharp, unmistakable handwriting filled the page. Linda, if you're reading this, it means you finally reached the breaking point I knew would come. My breath caught. He wrote about watching me from a distance, about seeing me struggle, about seeing Ethan's contempt grow, seeing me bend myself smaller and smaller to fit into a life that never respected me. Tonight, he humiliated you publicly, and you walked away with your dignity intact. Tears blurred the words. That's when I knew you were ready. I slid down against the brick wall, the envelope slipping into my lap as the city hummed around me, indifferent to the fact that my entire understanding of my past and my future was unraveling. He admitted he never abandoned me. He let me go. He wanted to know if I could survive without his money, without his protection, without the safety net he'd built. Any woman can succeed when failure isn't an option, he wrote. It takes real strength to build yourself from nothing. Enclosed with the letter were keys, business cards, legal documents, everything he had built, properties across Manhattan and Brooklyn, companies, investments, now legally belonged to me. I stared at the paperwork until the numbers stopped looking real. I should have felt rage, anger that he watched me struggle, that he saw Ethan treat me like I was disposable and stayed silent. But mostly, I felt vindicated. Hours earlier, my husband stood in a restaurant and announced I was worthless. And here was proof, cold, undeniable proof, that I had always been more than enough. One of the keys had a tag attached, an address on the Upper East Side. I took a cab there without thinking. The brownstone was stunning. Warm light glowed through the windows. The key fit perfectly. Inside, everything felt intentional. Hardwood floors, shelves filled with books on philosophy and business, furniture that felt lived in, not decorative. On the dining table sat another envelope. This is only the beginning, my father wrote. Don't waste energy on bitterness. Build something better. I sat there for a long time, replaying the night. Ethan's smile, his words, the silence of the table. I didn't feel weak anymore. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Missed calls, messages. Ethan. When I finally answered, his voice was soft, too soft. Linda, I made a mistake, he said quickly. I had too much wine. I didn't mean any of it. Please come home. We can fix this. You meant every word, I said calmly. You've been meaning them for years. Then he said the thing that confirmed everything. I heard about your father, he added, voice suddenly careful. About the inheritance. If I'd known. Stop, I cut in. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. You didn't love me when I had nothing, I said. You loved the idea of what I could give you. And now that you know I have money, you think I'm suddenly worth keeping. Silence. I ended the call. And for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I was finally choosing myself. The days that followed felt unreal, like I had stepped sideways into someone else's life while my own watched from a distance. Within 48 hours, I was sitting in conference rooms overlooking Manhattan, listening to attorneys and accountants explain what my father had spent 40 years building. 37 properties across Manhattan and Brooklyn, commercial buildings, residential complexes, investment accounts diversified across industries I'd only ever heard about in passing while cleaning their lobbies. And every document had my name on it. At the same time, the calls didn't stop. Ethan called, texted, left voicemails that shifted tone with each attempt. Remorse, anger, nostalgia, desperation. When that didn't work, his mother called. Linda, she said, her voice tight with forced warmth. We were all shocked by what happened. Ethan didn't mean for things to go that far. I let her talk. He's under so much pressure, she continued. And honestly, you have been difficult lately. Maybe if you'd been more supportive of his ambitions. I supported him for 10 years, I said quietly, emotionally, financially, silently. That doesn't make me difficult. She didn't respond to that. Friends joined in next. People who'd watched me get humiliated and said nothing suddenly wanted to mediate, to explain Ethan's behavior, to ask me to be the bigger person. Not one of them apologized for laughing. Meanwhile, the reality of my new position didn't wait. The first board meeting was brutal. Men and women who had worked with my father for decades looked at me with open skepticism. They knew I'd been estranged. They knew I'd been working as a superintendent. They assumed I'd be overwhelmed. They were wrong. I had spent every night studying financial reports, contracts, property histories. I asked questions. I listened. I didn't pretend to know what I didn't. And when I spoke from lived experience. I've cleaned these buildings, I told them. I know what breaks first. I know where tenants get ignored. And I know how invisible workers feel when no one listens. The room shifted. Respect didn't arrive all at once, but it started to grow. Then the truth came out. My father had been sick, aggressive cancer, diagnosed 2 years earlier. Thomas confirmed it quietly after one meeting, his voice low and careful. He wanted to be sure, Thomas said, about you. 3 months later, my father passed. The funeral was small, private. I delivered the eulogy, my voice steady even as my hands shook. He taught me strength, I said, not by holding me up, but by letting me stand on my own. Ethan tried to attend. Security stopped him at the door. After that, the messages turned frantic. Long emails about regret, about growth, about how he'd been blinded by pressure. He showed up unannounced at properties I owned, hoping to catch me off guard. I never met him. 8 months after everything changed, I walked past the restaurant. The same chandeliers, the same long table. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. I still visit the buildings I used to maintain. I shake hands with the staff. I remember names. I listen. Because I remember exactly what it feels like to be invisible. And I will never let anyone who works for me feel that way again. Ethan saw me one last time at a charity gala I hosted, raising money for vocational training programs. When our eyes met across the room, he froze. I walked past him like he wasn't there. Because in my life now, he isn't. People assume that once the power shifts, once the money arrives, once the truth is revealed, the pain disappears. It doesn't. It just changes shape. There was a night, about 6 weeks after my father's funeral, when the city felt unbearably quiet. I was alone in the brownstone, sitting at the dining table where his final letter had once rested, surrounded by documents that represented everything I had gained and everything I had lost. The silence pressed in on me. No footsteps, no distant hum of a shared life, no one asking how my day was. For 10 years, I had measured my worth by endurance, by how much I could carry without collapsing. And now that the weight had been lifted, I felt strangely unanchored. I replayed that dinner again and again. Ethan's smile, the way he said my job out loud, like a flaw, the laughter that followed. I wondered, briefly, dangerously, if I had missed something, if I could have said something different, if there had been a version of me that would have been enough for him. That thought scared me more than the humiliation ever had, because it meant I was still letting his voice live inside my head. I stood up and walked through the house, touching the walls, the shelves, the furniture my father had chosen. This life had been handed to me at the exact moment I felt smallest. But wealth didn't erase grief. It didn't replace the decade I spent trying to be loved by someone who saw me as a liability. That night, I cried for the first time. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quietly, alone, sitting on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, my hands covering my face like I could physically hold myself together. I cried for my grandfather, whose lessons had kept me alive through all of it. I cried for my father, who believed in me from a distance but never said it out loud until it was too late. And I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who thought love meant shrinking. The next morning, exhaustion settled into my bones. At work, I noticed it too. The decisions felt heavier, the responsibility more real. Hundreds of employees, thousands of tenants. Every choice I made rippled outward. And that's when the doubts crept in. What if they're right? What if I don't belong here? What if I was only chosen because of blood, not merit? I remembered Ethan's words, ambition, lifestyle, belonging, and felt that old ache return. That afternoon, I went to one of the buildings I used to manage. Not for a meeting, not for inspection. Just to stand there. I watched a maintenance worker polish the same marble floor I used to clean before sunrise. I saw the way tenants walked past him without eye contact, without thanks. He noticed me watching and straightened, nervous. "Is something wrong, ma'am?" he asked. "No," I said softly, "you're doing great." His shoulders relaxed. Something inside me settled. I wasn't here by accident. I knew this world from the ground up, from the bottom rung, from invisibility. That night, my lowest moment wasn't about losing Ethan. It was about finally letting go of the version of myself that believed love had to be earned through suffering. And once I saw that clearly, I understood something vital. This pain wasn't breaking me. It was burning away what no longer belonged. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came quietly, in moments that felt almost insignificant, until I realized they were changing everything. A week after that visit to the old building, Thomas asked me to meet him in my office. He placed a thin folder on the desk between us, his expression careful. "There's something your father wanted you to know," he said. Inside were notes, observations, dates, short, precise entries written in my father's hand. He had been tracking my life, not obsessively, not intrusively, but intentionally. He documented moments of choice, not outcome. Refused promotion that required exploiting staff. Worked overtime to cover tenant emergencies. Stayed in marriage despite personal cost. "He wasn't measuring your success," Thomas said. "He was measuring your character." The doubt loosened its grip. That same week, one of my father's longest-serving partners pulled me aside after a meeting. "You remind me of him," she said. "Not in how you talk, in how you listen." It stayed with me. Then the final piece fell into place. A junior manager, someone neutral, someone with nothing to gain, approached me after a property review. "I need to tell you something," he said, hesitating. "Your ex-husband contacted me." I felt a cold clarity wash over me. "He wanted inside information," the manager continued, "about which properties you were prioritizing, about your schedule." I thanked him for his honesty, and in that moment the last thread tying me to Ethan snapped. This wasn't regret. This was opportunism. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and saw myself clearly, not as someone discarded, not as someone elevated by money, but as someone who had chosen integrity every step of the way. The next morning, I filed the divorce paperwork. No drama, no confrontation, no speeches, just a clean final decision. I redirected my energy fully, into the company, into people, into building something aligned with who I actually was. I launched training programs for maintenance staff, created clear paths for advancement, implemented policies that valued labor, not just profit. And slowly the narrative shifted. Not because I proved anything to Ethan, but because I stopped carrying his judgment with me. Power isn't loud. It's calm, it's grounded, it's knowing when to walk away. And when I did, everything else fell into place. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unraveled, quietly at first, then all at the same time. Once the divorce paperwork was filed, I stopped shielding Ethan from the truth. Not by exposing him, not by retaliating, but by stepping completely out of the narrative he'd been trying to control for years. And without me there to prop up his image, things collapsed on their own. His friends noticed first. The same people who once laughed awkwardly at that dinner, who nodded along while he diminished me, began to see cracks in the version of Ethan they'd believed in. Without a wife willing to smooth things over, his bitterness had nowhere to hide. His complaints grew sharper. His charm wore thin. It turns out I'd been doing a lot of emotional labor no one ever acknowledged. Then came his family. His mother called again, not with excuses this time, but with panic threaded through her voice. "He's not doing well," she said. "He's been passed over for a promotion. People are talking." I listened politely. I didn't offer comfort, because I finally understood something I hadn't before. His success was never mine to maintain. At work, Ethan's behavior followed him. Word spreads fast in the circles he wanted so desperately to belong to. Public humiliation at a high-profile restaurant. A wife who walked away without pleading. An inheritance he tried, and failed, to insert himself into. Doors closed. Invitations stopped coming. And the man who once stood under chandeliers announcing my worthlessness now struggled to hold his own reputation together. Meanwhile, my life moved forward, steadily, deliberately. I expanded the vocational training initiative. Promoted from within, gave workers the respect I once needed and never received. I didn't announce my decisions. I didn't gloat. I just lived. The irony was sharp. Everything Ethan wanted, status, admiration, belonging, was built on optics. Everything I built was built on substance. About a year after that night, his circle dissolved completely. Friends distanced themselves. Colleagues stopped returning calls. The image he'd curated collapsed under its own weight. I heard all of this secondhand. I never asked. When the truth comes out on its own, it carries more power than anything you could ever reveal yourself. I left the marriage quietly. He was the one left standing in the ruins of his own making. I didn't rebuild my life in dramatic gestures. There was no revenge, no final confrontation, no moment where I stood in front of Ethan and listed everything he'd lost. I simply kept going. I wake up now before sunrise, not because I have to, but because I like the quiet. I drink my coffee slowly, watching the city stretch awake outside my window. Some mornings, I still walk through the buildings I own, not to inspect, but to remember. To remember who I was. The woman who polished floors before dawn. The woman who learned dignity from work no one applauded. The woman who stayed kind even when it cost her. I didn't win because I inherited money. I won because I never let bitterness turn me into someone I didn't recognize. Ethan taught me something without meaning to. He showed me that love built on appearances will always collapse. That ambition without integrity is hollow. That people who measure worth by status will never be satisfied because there will always be someone richer, shinier, louder. And my father taught me something too. That strength isn't about control or legacy. It's about trust, about believing someone can stand on their own, even when it hurts to watch. I don't hate Ethan. I don't even think about him much anymore. He was a chapter, not the story. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's this. Your value is not defined by your job title, your income, or the approval of people who only love you when you're useful to them. It's defined by how you treat others when no one is watching, by whether you can walk away with your dignity intact. Sometimes, the most devastating night of your life is actually the moment everything false finally burns away. And what's left? That's who you were always meant to become.